Greetings again everyone. The Japanese Tokina lens company have been quite busy recently, going in a slightly new direction and marketing some manual focus lenses. However, today they're going back to their autofocus roots with a new ATX-M 11 to 18mm f2.8e ultra wide-angle zoom lens, designed especially for Sony's mirrorless aps-c E-mount cameras. Here is what you see if you mount it on a full frame one. It'll be $699 when it comes out, with a 2-year limited warranty, and its zoom range is the full frame equivalent of 17 to 27mm. Not a huge zoom range, but a useful one nonetheless. Alongside a bright maximum aperture of f2.8, the lens will be handy for all kinds of stills and video work. I'd like to thank Tokina very much for sending me a copy of this lens for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. We'll be looking at both its strengths and its weaknesses. The first thing you'll notice about the lens is that it's fairly small and looks well designed. Its body is mostly made of plastic, so it's pretty lightweight at 335 grams. The lens mount is made of metal. It's not weather sealed, but there is a micro USB port in the rear for future firmware updates, which is always reassuring to see. The lens does not have an auto manual focus switch or focus hold button. However, it has a nice zoom ring, which is rubberized and turns extremely smoothly without any stickiness. The front of the lens extends and retracts a little as you zoom in and out. In front of that comes a focus ring, also rubberized and also turning smoothly. The focus motor doesn't work that precisely with it, but it does get the job done. As you change focus, the lens presents quite a lot of breathing in and out, as you can see here. I'd say that would be annoying for video makers, but then again, it's not too often that you need to do huge focus pulls when shooting at ultra-wide angles. The autofocus worked silently and pretty accurately in my tests. It's just averagely fast when shooting in stills mode, but as is often the case with a Sony camera, shoot in continuous autofocus mode and the speed jumps up. The lens comes with a hood that feels incredibly rough and scratchy to touch on the outside. Goodness knows why Tokina decided to give it such a strange finishing texture, but whatever, it's a lens hood. The lens does not feature image stabilization, but it does accept front filters of 67mm inside, very useful on an ultra-wider lens. Overall, the build quality here is lightweight but really quite nice. It's a pleasure to handle. I remember the giant, metallic, heavy, clunky old Tokina lenses for digital SLR cameras from a few years ago. This new design from them is simply light years ahead. I guess they must have been working on it for a while. Okay, let's take a look at image quality now. I'll be testing it on my little Sony a5100 with its 24 megapixel aps-c sized sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At 11mm and f2.8, in the middle of the image, we see fantastic sharpness and contrast right away. Corner image quality is softer, particularly right in the edges, although on a whole, a decent amount of detail is still being captured here. Stop down to f5.6 for a small improvement in sharpness and contrast in those corners, and at f8, they look just a touch cleaner again. That's as sharp as the image quality gets. Well, let's zoom in to 18mm now. At f2.8, in the middle of the image, we see very good, if not quite razor sharpness. Let's look in the corners now. They are certainly looking softer, but not utterly disastrous. Stop down to f4 for a small improvement in the corners, and back in the middle, we are treated to razor sharpness now. Let's stop down to f5.6. The middle looks as sharp as ever, and the good news is that the corner image quality, while still a bit softer, is really starting to look decently good. f8 looks nice and sharp from corner to corner. Stop down as far as f11 or darker, and diffraction begins to soften the image again. Overall, this little lens does take us on a bit of an image quality rollercoaster ride, but its sharpness is generally good enough. Most of all, I just wish it were a little sharper in the corners at 18mm, but landscape photographers can get the sharpness they need by stopping down the aperture. Alright, let's turn off in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 11mm, barrel distortion is only moderate, but the corners are a bit dark at f2.8. Stop down to f4 and they brighten up a little. Zoom into 13mm and that distortion straightens out. zoom all the way into 18mm, and we are treated to moderately strong pincushion distortion, although vignetting doesn't seem too bad here. This lens can focus as closely as 30cm to your subject, which is fantastic for getting some creatively wide-angle close-ups. At 11mm and f2.8, we see good sharpness, but also some ghosting on contrasting edges. Stop down to f4 for contrast to make a return, and at f5.6 we see excellent sharpness also. Let's take a look at how the lens works against bright lights now. We are seeing an average amount of flaring and glaring here of different types, but it's not too disastrous, and the lens does hold on to its contrast fairly well. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look at Coma Levels. At 11mm and f2.8, bright points of light in image corners see a touch of smudginess, but it's nothing too serious. Stop down to f4 to see it go away. Let's zoom out and look for sunstars now. They only really begin to emerge at f11 or f16, but they never look particularly well defined, at least not on this copy of the lens. And finally, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Even at f2.8, it's tricky to get out-of-focus backgrounds on such a wide-angle optic. Tokina lenses have struggled with their out-of-focus backgrounds in the past, but actually on this lens they look fine, decently soft. Overall, the Tokina ATX-M 11-18mm f2.8 is a very nice little step forward for the company, much better to use than its digital SLR ancestors, although it's not perfect. I especially would have liked to see a bit more corner sharpness out of it, but aside from that, there are few, if any, serious issues. It directly competes with Tamron's very good 11-20mm f2.8 lens, so let's compare them briefly. Both lenses have similarly good build quality and autofocus motors, and both exhibit similar levels of focus breathing. The Tamron lens is just a tiny bit sharper than the Tokina when zoomed all the way out, but the Tokina lens works better against bright light, showing less flaring. The Tokina lens is smaller and cheaper than the Tamron, but the Tamron has a very slightly longer zoom range. Well, honestly, it really is just swings and roundabouts between these two, so I'll leave it up to you to make up your own minds based on what you need. The Tokina ATX-M 11-18mm f2.8 may not be a great camera lens, but it is a good one, and it's quite reasonable value for money too, so it does come recommended. Thanks for watching everyone, and a huge thank you to all my supporters over on Patreon. I love the little community that's growing over there, and I also love putting all kinds of exclusive content and advanced previews for supporters there too. Check it out in the description below to keep this channel trucking on, and ciao for now everyone.